Deezer recently dumping 26 million tracks off their platform?
Organized crime in Sweden has been laundering money through Spotify for years. Over half of the musicians on streaming services are paying money for you to pay money to listen to their music.
There's a whole faucet at your front door. Let that sink in.
DIY.
DIYers, before anybody accuses me of having an unhealthy obsession with the shenanigans of a platform like Spotify, I need you to know that this discovery goes deeper than just a Spotify. I'm paying attention to all of these DSPs. One of them in particular, one that I never really did much digging or research on. I mean, maybe in passing, because they were supposedly the ones that inspired Spotify's idea of creating that 1,000 stream threshold. That was inspired by a artist-centric model that Deezer put in place. There was a video that I found here on Instagram from brand strategist as well as radio programmer named Terry Thomas. And she broke this new news down in such an interesting way. I just wanted to share it with my DIYer friends. Check this video out.
Quality over quantity going to be the new trend. So look, I'm out here like a student, right? I'm looking for information about the game because I'm trying to follow the breadcrumbs to see what the new normal might be. So when my friend DJ Eddie F sent me an article about Deezer recently dumping 26 million tracks off their platform.
Somebody gonna have to tell the truth, and I'm gonna tell it.
How do you just quietly delete 26 million? 26,000, sure. 26 million.
I was locked and loaded. So Deezer is a streaming platform based in France. And why did they decide to clear the clutter and get 26 million tracks off the platform? They wanted to make it a better experience for the artists that use the platform and also for the consumers that stream on the platform. So what did they decide was low quality? How did they make a choice? Well, low quality was defined as this: fake artists, tracks that had little to no streaming history, and songs that just had low sonic quality.
It's getting nasty out here. Did you hear that? Not only are they determining what their definition is of a professional artist, even though I, as a professional artist, have existed longer than Deezer's been even around, the songs that they wanted to delete off of the platform were about what they deemed as low quality, what they deemed as fake artists. And we've been seeing how songs have been getting plucked off of these platforms because of fictitious streams that they don't have to even prove even happened. This brings me back to that story we did about Congress trying to pass a bill to increase the stream payout to a penny. Fam, this is how they're acting when they have to pay out 0.003. Can you imagine how much more gatekeeping will exist if they had to pay you a penny?
Production wasn't good, mixing and mastering wasn't good, just didn't have a good sonic quality. So they cleared the clutter. What does this mean for you as an artist? Well, I think production quality is going to move back into an all-time high. Solid production, good mixing and mastering. You got to make sure the sonic quality is there. Number two, you got to promote your tracks. That goes back to fan engagement and where you're driving them to listen to your song. Number three, you got to monitor the progress of your track on these platforms to know if you need to pivot.
So here's the actual write-up on a website called Rights Tech Project. And they kind of explain a little bit more in detail about this Deezer decision to remove over 13% of the entire content off of their DSP. Deezer says that it had around 200 million pieces of content on the platform last year, which means that over 13% of its content has been deleted. The intention is to declutter the platform, focus on tracks that are valuable to our users, and increase the market share for all artists who create this music. The tracks that have been removed include noise, so I'm assuming like white noise, mono-track albums. Sorry guys, no mono-track albums. Fake artists, which they're not describing, and tracks that haven't been listened to in the past 12 months. I haven't downloaded Deezer in the past 42 years, yet when it's their house, like I always say, they get to determine the rules. Shout out to Ben Jordan, who created this video, finally made a video describing not only his experience when TuneCore took down 23 of his albums, but also he gave a little bit of a history in streaming, how we got to this point, but specifically where I'm going to zone in on is where he starts to talk about digital distribution, and he brings up a point that I think we need to absolutely talk about.
So in 2005, if you bought my music on iTunes, Apple would keep 30%. Then a digital distributor would take 40% of that, and then my label would take 50% of what remained, leaving me with...
All I hear, go get the money, so I go get it.
And of course, that's only after label promotion and manufacturing costs were recouped. But then in comes a company called CD Baby, who was initially known for shipping babies insulated by CDs. And they partnered with Apple to let independent musicians distribute music to iTunes for a fee and/or percentage of sale. TuneCore was founded in 2006 and offered a similar service, charging a flat fee per album for distribution. And boy, TuneCore was not cheap. There was a point where I was paying in excess of $1,000 annually to keep my albums on iTunes and streaming services. By 2012, TuneCore was being paid these high fees to distribute over 10% of the entire iTunes music library, yet somehow was dealing with harsh cash flow issues and allegedly was even insolvent for a period of time. They would later be acquired by Believe Music, who, as of this week, may be acquired by Warner Music Group.
Are you recognizing that you're participating in wrestling yet? Are you at that point now where you're recognizing, damn, Santa Claus might not be real in the music industry? Are you seeing what's happening? They control even the spaces, or they have an opportunity, I should say, because it's not complete with this deal. They have an opportunity to even control the places that you're navigating when you say, hey, I'm independent. I'm just utilizing these third-party, websites and whatnot, and I'm pushing my independent music. It's all coming full circle.
Now, Warner Music Group is owned and controlled by Access Holdings, who also owns the controlling equity in Deezer, and they have deep investments in Amazon, Beats by Dre, and, of course, Spotify. So if this Warner and Believe acquisition goes through, I will release a complex 950-page instruction manual titled How to Listen to Music Without Giving Money to a Far Right-Wing Super PAC, because it's about to get pretty fucking tricky. Distrokid came onto the scene in 2013 with a low flat fee for virtually unlimited releases, which made putting music in digital stores and streaming platforms much more affordable for an independent musician. Spotify, instead of offering artists a way to upload music directly that Spotify could then make money off of, instead invested in Distrokid so they could make money off of the process of growing their library. And
maybe y'all might recall, but there was a quick moment where Spotify was kind of hinting at allowing you to directly upload to Spotify. And then I do remember shortly after that, as he's kind of lining up, Distrokid kind of made their way into the conversation, and then Spotify ended up becoming an investor in them.
Now, not enough money to make a profit. Let's not get crazy. This is like a pyramid scheme, but there's a hole in the side of the pyramid and money just leaks out into the fucking Nile River. Anyway, that startup investment helped quite a bit, as these days Distrokid is by far the most used digital distribution service. And at $23 a year for unlimited music distribution, that is pretty affordable. And you totally get what you pay for. There is no official public count of Distrokid's full-time employees, but ZoomInfo estimates that number to be 279. They have over 2 million artists, so even if half of their entire workforce was artist support staff, that would be over 14,000 musicians per representative.
Somebody gonna have to tell the truth, and I'm gonna tell it.
There goes your answer to why customer service is sometimes tricky when dealing with some of these companies. He just said that because of the number of artists, I believe he said 2 million that are on the platform specifically of Distrokid, that means that according to what their estimated number of employees is, 1,400 people would have to be assigned to one individual employee to do that customer service.
In other words, if something goes wrong, you're absolutely fucked, because it's literally more cost effective for these platforms to not have you as a customer than it is to try and solve your issue.
That right there, what he just said, rewind it. Hold on.
Because it's literally more cost effective for these platforms to not have you as a customer than it is to try and solve your issue.
Him highlighting that in these situations, taking a loss on you saying your customer service was trash to the company and them not responding at all, I feel like that applies to TuneCore as well. It doesn't even justify it in cost for them to even care or respond. If that's how it's always been, I could only imagine how allegedly it could be now when the economy is heading the direction it's heading right now.
Nah, and I'm still not content till I'm dominating every single continent. Go stupid, you don't think, then use your common sense. I did your wire and I know that I'm a product. When they play that new king, all the DOIs go crazy. All the DOIs go crazy. When they play that new king, all the DOIs go crazy. All the DOIs go crazy.
Since the beginning of digital music streaming, someone somewhere has been trying to circumvent the system to milk royalties, and it hasn't been all that difficult. In fact, organized crime in Sweden has been laundering money through Spotify for years. This handsome guy made a whole video about it. But from the criminal's perspective, the problem with fake streams is that you need to do it very subtly and carefully over very long periods of time to avoid getting caught. And when I made this video, I spoke to some people who did it and I looked at their numbers, and it's actually not worth doing for the money alone unless you're trying to launder it or something like that.
This sounds like the plot from a movie called Office Space. I don't know if y'all ever seen Office Space. This is the plot of how these folks working a regular 9-to-5 were going to find their way to retirement. They were just basically leaking small amounts at a time, and that movie's been out, so I'm going to give away the plot. But they end up taking way too much money one time, and then it raised a bunch of eyebrows, and, they damn near got in trouble. But it definitely sounds like the plot to Office Space.
It's a bit like counting cards in blackjack. If you do it perfectly and carefully without raising suspicion and you don't make any mistakes, you can make about $19 an hour or so. It's not really the best gig. So why are fake streams such a huge issue? So huge, in fact, that to combat fake streaming, Spotify is no longer paying royalties on music with less than 1,000 streams per year, which happens to be about 2/3 of the music on Spotify.
I did not know that. So this decision affects about 2/3 of the music on Spotify. That's where that $40 million came from, that they're going to pay the rest of the pool, huh? You getting why? Are you starting to see what I was seeing? I didn't have these details, but I had enough details. That's nasty.
Come to think of it, do you know what might just make an artist tempted to participate in fake streaming? Not paying them any of the royalties they're owed until they reach a certain threshold. So congratulations, Spotify. You may have just actually made fake streaming a net positive for musicians. Okay, so on the other side of this artificial stream thing, this is such a clusterfuck that I'm going to need to draw it out. Allegedly, Spotify is now fining record labels and digital distributors like Distrokid and TuneCore $10 per song that they suspect is receiving 90% or more artificial streams, which I don't even understand the logic, but sure. Now, Distrokid, the company that musicians hire to put their music on Spotify on their behalf, are acting as a mouthpiece for Spotify and fining the musicians $10 per song to be considered to go back onto Spotify. Now, here's the kicker. Spotify once owned a hefty minority stake in Distrokid, and they sold most of it off. And now, from what I've dug up, they own 4%. Major labels have been gifted equity in Spotify before the company even went public, and are thought to currently own as much as 20% of Spotify. So when 1/5 of Spotify is owned by the media conglomerates who make the most money from royalties, and then their solution to streaming fraud is redistributing the money from smaller musicians to those media conglomerates, and then actually having the balls to penalize musicians with monetary fines in this witch hunt, this is what's actually happening. If you are an independent musician who is participating in the streaming economy, both you and your listeners are paying these companies in the transaction of selling your music. Chances are that your intellectual property actually has negative value right now. It's absurd, but stick with it.
Think about that for a second. Artists who are not taking account of how much money is going out. Too many artists are doing this. How much money is going out for a service that has so many promises to build your fan base, so many promises to expose you to new people, so many promises, yet you get taxed so much when they can't figure out a better system. If I were to do my numbers at the end of the year and just look at this, I would say I am losing money by investing into these distributors. But how many of us are doing that? And how many of us have been so hypnotized by this conversation of what you have to do because it's a slap in the face to consumers and you're not getting to the chili because of it? Doing it that way hasn't presented a profit. Maybe it's time to try something else. I'm going to let Ben end this one out. We're going to have some final thoughts.
Distrokid claimed to be distributing between 30 and 40% of all new music on Spotify. And when I dug into the sources of music on Spotify's New Music Friday playlist around that time, Distrokid was only distributing 1.34% of the music in it. In top hits, they were only distributing 0.3%. This means that you're about roughly 2,000% more likely to get featured on Spotify's top playlists if you're with a major label that partners with the service. Ready for more? I polled a few hundred musicians with music on digital distributors, and only 27% of them were making more money than they were spending on distribution fees. What this potentially means is that well over half of the musicians on streaming services are paying money for you to pay money to listen to their music.
There's a whole faucet at your front door. Let that sink in. The hell is that? Try to think of this as if you're 40 years into the future, 20 years into the future, and all of this crazy smoke and dust has finally settled into something that is allowing artists to get paid their money independently. Try to see it from the future, and then look back at this time and think about how many times you've allowed that automatic transaction to go through for a distributor so that you can have your music sit on a platform like a Spotify, like an Apple Music, that doesn't prioritize your music, just makes it available. It's a great service for that, right? That's awesome. You get to make it available on one of the most popular platforms. My fans, of course, can get to it. Hopefully they get notified. Hopefully they pre-save. But when you look in the environment, just think about this. You're paying money for someone else to put your music in front of your fans. Then you're going on the offensive and becoming a marketer for a platform that won't even pay 2/3 of the artists on it in a Spotify unless they reach 1,000 streams. Here's the kicker though. They get to determine how many of those streams are fictitious, whether or not you can be on the platform, and also who they prioritize in the algorithm.
And that's not all. Out of the musicians I polled, 9% of them had at some point had their music banned or suspended from streaming services. And all of the people with the music removed were using digital distributors that collected subscription fees rather than a percentage of royalty. What's even more interesting, I asked the musicians if they have ever paid for fake streaming before, either in a way that they thought was legitimate or illegitimate at the time. And the ones who had paid for fake streams were a little bit less likely to have had their music pulled off of Spotify for fake streaming. So,
is this Wally World? Are you seeing this? There were people who actually admitted when they took this poll that Ben Jordan had available. He asked the question, did you actually falsify your streams? I think we're living in a generation where people they're not even ashamed of saying that they do, right? I think their mentality is something that Russ even spoke about the major labels doing, which you do a little bit of something fake to make a little bit of real money in the process. So I think people are, of course, in this era, on that fake it to make it scenario. Of the people who actually faked the streams, they weren't the ones that got penalized as much as the people who didn't fake streams. If they're acting like this about the fraction of a penny, what do you think they'll do over a penny?
At least in this data, there is literally no correlation between deliberate fake streams and the artists getting accused of and punished for them. In fact, it seems like across the board, with no exceptions that I could find, when you pay to be submitted to a playlist, you're increasing the odds that you will be accused of fake streaming or fined, or your music will be nuked from streaming services.
When it's their house, it's their rules. When it's their house, they get to tell you what analytics you can have access to. Seeing some of these stories that have come, starting off, of course, with Deezer deleting 26 million songs off their platform, it's very suspicious to me how 1 second these platforms could talk about their embracing of AI and how AI is helping them to automate things that they used to need a staff for. But it's also interesting to see just like how Ben Jordan had 23 of his albums removed during the weekend, and they said that usually they're not there during the weekend, but he's like, well, somebody had to take this down. He was making up to $500,000 based upon the music that was up there, and it just got swiped away. That wasn't no damn bot. And if your bots are doing that, it seems like you'd be more proactive about fixing that problem than trying to go on a witch hunt for people who are actually making legitimate streams in your business model. When the economy starts turning, companies get nasty. Inflation hits, prices go up, companies start acting nasty. And this just seems like this is an extension of that nasty business that is occurring. You gotta make what decision is best for your business, DIYers.
DIY.
This was the writing on the wall that I saw last year. Folks was laughing in my face about this. This was the writing on the wall that I saw. What I recognize is that although that stream threshold wasn't gonna bother Curtis King, it wasn't gonna bother me yet. When you got people who are legitimately making a business, have been in this business for 20 odd years plus, just like me, that are having the music just immediately removed after never having this issue before, you gotta ask questions about where are your ethics at? What is your goal now? What are you trying to get rid of? Are you trying to get rid of those who are actually doing the authentic work so that you can prioritize a few of your tokens, your token independence, so you can prioritize your biggest artists that are on the platform, the Taylor Swifts, the Billie Eilishes? What is it turning into and why? And does that fit your goals as being an independent artist? Those are my thoughts though, DIYers. You let me know what you think.
DIY.
DIYers, if you enjoyed this content, make sure that you hit the like button and maybe even consider subscribing. Come on, man. Stop being greedy. Peace.